brought this down from the kids' question room. It's smaller than I thought it was, so we'll make it work. I feel weird. Brother Gary, thank you. That means a lot. It means a little more when the people that you look up to, brag on you a little bit, even if I don't really deserve those words. I'm going to try to stick real close. I got my Uncle Mike pointer back here. I'm borrowing that. I'm going to try to stick really close for time's sake. I'm going to have my phone out here too just so I can see it. And as I get done with these, I may just toss them to the side because I don't have enough room to move with them. So just a quick intro about me. My name's Christian. I'm currently serving as a school counselor for Hawkins County Schools. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and recently got my doctorate in education. But I'll say this, my most prized accomplishment in my life is being a lifelong servant of Jesus Christ. I've been more privileged, more privileged than I ever knew to have grown up in a family and grow up around not just family that were in the church, but were in ministry, to see not just what church is on Sunday and Wednesday and rally, but what the preparation of church is like, what all the extra things that are involved in church is like. And I appreciate my heritage with that. And mental health is not usually a subject of a presentation that you find a group full of men in. So I appreciate you showing up for that. I'm not going to teach you how to get strong or maybe even how to make it to heaven tonight. But maybe something that we talk about tonight will make your time on this earth a little easier. So I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can. I'm going to have to get through the deep stuff first. When we're getting into mental health, this is going to sound weird, but I feel like our best starting point is when we look at some astrological positioning of intergalactic solar systems. That's going to be based on just a multi-statistical analysis. We're just going to look at one of these. And the man who started it all, we're looking at Galileo, was born February 15th, 1564. I'm just kidding, y'all. We ain't going that far. Just kidding. When I was going into my whole family's business in some realm, and so when I started telling my parents and aunts and uncles that I wanted to get a psychology degree, it was kind of like some hesitancy there, and it was rightfully so. A lot of people, when you hear psychology or sociology, they're very secular fields in terms of their ideologies and things like that. But I want you to know tonight, of everything that I've looked at in both realms, there could not be two things that support each other more. And I think that it's wholeheartedly the way that God designed us to be, that the way our brains work and the way our behavior works would absolutely agree with His Word. John 10:10, the second part of this, we're going to go back to the first part in a second. It says, I'm come that you might have life, and then you might have it more abundantly. And since He told people on several occasions to give up all their possessions and follow Him, I'm not sure that this abundant life has anything to do with the possessions or riches that we carry. And I think that we see that when we look at these translations. You can tell that I'm Uncle Mike and Big John's nephew. We're going into the Hebrew translations and stuff. The word life in this scripture, a couple meanings of that is possessed of vitality, active, vigorous, and absolute fullness. If we're looking at abundantly, that means superior, extraordinary, surpassing, and more than excellent. So my hope is that tonight we can uncover some of the ways that we can start to live that more abundant, more superior, more extraordinary life that's possessed with vitality, that's vigorous and absolutely full of whatever God has for us. So why is this important? Well, we'll see why it's important. We'll get that in a second. Why is this important? According to Johns Hopkins University, 1 in 4 adults in the United States suffer from a diagnosable mental disorder. Now, I want to draw attention to this. That is a mental disorder. That is not a mental health symptom. That is being diagnosed with depression versus just feeling depressed, or being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder rather than just feeling anxious. 1 in 4. I would say that 100% of people feel these things, but 1 in 4 feel them to an extent where they are considered a disorder. Among the leading cause of death, suicide ranked second in ages 10. This is where this starts at, 10 through 34. Fourth in ages 35 through 44. Fifth in ages 45 through 54. And eighth in 54 through 64. However, if we're going to look at actual numbers rather than percentages, because as you age, obviously, the things that you may die from increases, the highest rate of suicide by volume is middle-aged white males, somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 in each of those categories every year, between 35, 45, and the 55 category. Men also died nearly 4 times more often than women from suicide. Now, mental health has been something that has been in the news a lot lately. It's a recent thing that it's really getting pushed. But I want us to look at, it'll catch up. We'll do a game here in a second. Let's look at the Bible for a second. These are, the men that we look after, admire their stories, we admire their leadership. For the most part, the concept of mental health is not something that we really put towards the forefront of our importance. Right? Self-reflection, emotional recognition, developing health and coping strategies are probably not something that you had on your daily to-do list today. The mental health of a man, though, is vitally important, and no one is immune to the negative effects of mental health that has declined due to our neglect of it. So I would like to read for you a couple of excerpts from the scriptures that are related to the men beside them right now. King David in Psalms 38. Listen to some of these excerpts from this chapter. This is King David talking. There is no rest in my bones. My iniquities are too heavy for me. I mourn all day long. I am feeble and sore broken. My heart panteth. My strength faileth. The light of mine eyes is gone. Haman the Ezrahite, who was the grandson of the prophet Samuel in Psalms 88, I am a man with no strength, like the slain that lie in the grave. Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps. I am afflicted and ready to die. Job in Job 3, this is talking about his birth. Let the day perish in which I was born. Let God not regard it. Let darkness and shadow of death stain it. Why died I not in the womb? Elijah keeps it pretty short and sweet in 1 Kings 19 when he said, it's enough now, O Lord, take away my life. Jonah in Jonah 4, the sun beat upon the head of Jonah that he fainteth and wished himself to die. And he said, it is better for me to die than to live. See, mental health is not a new thing. It's not that we were all just great and good, and then all of a sudden in the past 10 years things got really bad and we didn't know what to do with it. This has been something that men have struggled with all throughout the course of time. And we may not want to talk about it. We may not want to open ourselves up to that kind of vulnerability. We may not have nobody to talk to about it, feel like. We may resort to the suck it up and get through it mentality that a lot of us adopt, especially in our culture. But we have to change that narrative somehow. Not only for our sake, but for those who we lead at our job, at our church, and in our home. Now we get to game time. So I'm gonna present our first topic with an activity, and it has very simple instructions. So I want you to follow them closely, don't deviate from them, follow them, and then we'll introduce our first topic.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So if you've seen it before, you probably spotted the gorilla. Who missed the gorilla completely? I did too. The first time I saw it, I completely missed it. Completely missed it. Which is why our first topic I want to discuss tonight is our focus. And in terms of mental health, I want us to define it like this. It's where we spend our mental energy. The video we just watched demonstrates a couple of key things. That our focus is incredibly powerful. Even to the point that our brain can completely overlook glaring and obvious things. The gorilla didn't just sneak by. He literally stopped in the middle, beat his chest, and walked through, right? The player slipping out or the curtain changing colors is different, but our focus is incredibly powerful. The second thing is we have the ability of what to focus on. You were given very specific instructions of what to do with that video. What if you were given instructions to look for the gorilla? Probably would have been pretty easy. So we have the ability to start to develop and choose what this focus is. We see a picture up here as well. It's a pretty common picture that most of you have probably seen. And regardless of the concept that we hear a lot of multitasking, your brain physically can't focus on two things at the same time. Rather, it has a tendency to bounce back and forth. So we look at this picture as an example. You can see two faces staring at each other in white, or you see a chalice or a vase in the middle that's black. Even if you know both of them are there, the instant your focus shifts to one, brings it to the front, the other has a tendency to fall into the background. So when we're looking at our focus, both of these things confirm the biblical principle of no man can serve two masters. Our focus has got to be on something specific. We see the effects of changes in focus on several occasions in the Bible. Both of these stories are very common. As Lot and his family were escaping Sodom, they had strict instructions. Your focus is to stay away from the city. Right? Your instructions were watch the white ball. Players in white. But what's Lot's wife? Her focus shifted. And because of that, she fell into a pillar of salt, became a pillar of salt. Probably the greatest example, more songs, more messages maybe has been preached about this event than maybe any other. Peter in the Sea of Galilee, the Bible tells us that as long as Peter's focus was on Jesus, as long as his focus was on what it was supposed to be on, everything was good, everything was perfect. It was the second that his focus shifted into things that caught his eye. This wave got a little too big and changed his perspective and perception a little bit, and we know that he began to sink. So I want us to put focus into two categories for a second. Problem-centered focus and solution-centered focus. Problems present without a whole lot of effort. We can see those pop up. We don't have to think about them. We don't have to analyze them. They pop up really easily. And so this is usually what our default is. Our brain likes easy, right? It's the path of least resistance. It's the thing that we can, is easiest going to be for us to survive. And so problem-centered focus is pretty much our default. Because of this, it can quickly magnify from thinking not only of what the problem is now, but when our newly developed logical, side of our brain kicks in and not just our fight or flight survival response, it starts to magnify into what it could become. And then we'll talk about that a little more in our second focus and we get to talking about the power of our thoughts. But real quickly, the thing that pops up, it goes from what the problem is now to what it could become, and it spirals out of control. Solution focus centered, however, it's something that must be cultivated. It's something that's intentional. It's got to be sought after. This is a buried treasure, so to speak, whose rewards is far worth more than the effort it is to find it. See, it's within the solution-centered focus that you escape Sodom and you walk on water. This is the kind of focus where faith thrives, is in solution-centered focus. Matthew 7:7 says, "Ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you." So here's a question I would have regarding your focus tonight. What are you asking for? What are you seeking after? What doors are you knocking on? And maybe a better question, are we asking at all? Are we seeking at all? Are we knocking at all? Is our focus even something that is in the forefront of what we're trying to do, or is it something that we just go along with? We're just going with the flow. See, if we're completely honest with ourselves, we would probably say that our focus, is it more problems or is it more solutions? Where we just came from or where are we going? The mistakes that we committed or the lessons that we learned out of that? See, that's the difference between problem-centered focus and a solution-centered focus. Life shouldn't be something that just happens to us. Rather, it should be something that we make and explore. We got another activity that we're going to do here in just a second. Okay, let's go back for a second. So I'm going to give you some instructions. The following is an example of how our focus can change based on what our perception is focused on. So the following audio clip it's the same phrase. It's about a 20-second loop. There's no tricks, there's no gimmicks, there's no edits. So your task is to either, and you can do both, I guess, it's to look at one word at a time. You're going to be given two words. One word is going to be green needle, and the other word is going to be brainstorm. You can only look at one word at a time, but at any point in this 20 seconds, you can look at the same word the whole time. You can look at one for two, run through, and then switch. Do whatever you want to do. But though not 100% of the time, you will most likely hear the word that you are focusing on. So interesting fact, I did this right before, and it would flip on me. That time it did not. Interesting, though, did it flip for anybody? If you looked at one, I got some yeses, I got some no's, some of it was the same. That's just a real small example, one small audio clip that can show us that, like I said, it was different for me. It depended on which side I'm looking at it. One example, though, of how what we are looking at can depend on what we hear and what we see. Our life is kind of like the voice in this video, and our perceptions of life can depend on which word that we're looking at. If you know which movie this picture's from, you'll probably know the quote that's about to follow. Tonight I want to relate this quote to our focus. Pick a target. Pick a way you want to feel. Pick a struggle you want to overcome. Pick a problem you want to fix. And let your focus shift to the solutions of how we can make this happen. Because if you aim small, you miss small. So birthed from focus is tonight's second topic. Your thoughts are the most powerful thing in this entire world. The creation of thoughts happens when nearly 86 billion brain cars, we call those neurons, travel on over 100 trillion little roads called synapses. These cars and roads are created through your experiences, your genetics, and your observations throughout life. Thoughts are the central force of our awareness of what the world is going on around us and our ability to comprehend that world. Got some quotes from three pretty recognizable individuals throughout history. King Solomon stated in the book of Proverbs, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." Philosopher Rene Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And inventor Henry Ford presented this idea: whether you think you can or you think you can't, You're right. It's amazing that, though these men were in completely different time periods, they seem to agree that thoughts are so powerful that they are directly responsible for the creation of our identity. It's going to glitch on me here in a second. I get to geek out for a second because this is my this is the fun stuff. The power of thoughts. This picture representation is of probably, if not the one of the main psychological theories called cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not going to go into it real deep, but the basis of this theory points to the relationship between our thoughts, how that impacts our emotions or our feelings, and then how that then impacts our actions. So in a nutshell, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short, explains our motivations in life, how they come primarily from the way that we think, whether our perceptions are accurate or not. This theory suggests that an unhealthy or dysregulated mental state is established when one's pattern of thought becomes distorted or twisted. So I'm going to run through these real quick. Cognitive distortions, I heard Big John saying this sometimes. Stinking thinking. Right? I want to shed some light on exactly what that means, because I'm a big believer that if you're aware of something, it's going to be much easier for you to handle. I talk to my kids at school sometimes. If I were to put you out in the middle of Stone Drive, blindfolded, and ask you to avoid traffic, it's going to be difficult. Your awareness of where things are coming from, what they're doing, is not going to be that great. But the minute I take that blindfold off, it may not be fun, but it becomes much easier. Cognitive distortions are nasty little tricks of the devil used to steal your joy, your peace, your faith, your relationships, and your trust in God. They are the disruptors of positive change to our thoughts and beliefs. At the beginning of this talk, we read the second part of John 10:10, talking about that abundant life. Man, and that's a nice part of that verse. But the first part of that verse states something a little bit more interesting, right, as far as in relation to how it ends. The first part of that scripture states that the thief cometh not, but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Now that's interesting to me, because if somebody commits multiple crimes, I'm probably going to recognize them as the one that is the most severe. So the fact that I see in here that he's wanting to kill, but he's called a thief, is interesting. If I say the name Charles Manson to you, you probably don't know him as a 13-year-old who stole a car. Happened. I didn't even know that. You probably don't know him as someone who robbed a convenience store. Also happened, right? He's a thief. What do we know him as, though? He's most likely known for creating a cult following known as the Manson family, and convicted of 9 murders. He's known as a murderer, not a thief. So why thief in John 10? Because stealing your happiness, your peace, and your faith creates a slippery slope that makes it so much easier for him to steal your eternity. And that is so much worse than anything that he has the ability to kill. He uses these 10 ways to infiltrate your mind, to hack your sanity, and like all good hackers are able to do, we probably don't even know he's in there. Probably don't even know he's in there. So what would tonight be without a top 10 list? Let's run through these real fast. All or nothing thinking. This is a thought pattern that's either perfection or failure. There's no in between. There's no gray. And which one of those do you think happens more often? It's not the perfection, that's for sure. I don't know that anybody that would look at this would say, yeah, I've hit perfection a time or two, because there's always something that pulls up that says, man, I could have done that better. This often leads to our motivation being crippled due to the failed beliefs that are established within ourselves. Number 2, overgeneralization. This is when words like always and never come into play. We associate one event, and then we make that turn into every event that is to happen after that. We get passed over at one job interview, so we'll never get that job. Never going to happen. Mental filters. Some of these are pretty similar. I'll try to point out the differences. You filter out and ignore positivity to hyper-focus on specific negativity. Think back to the video we watched with the gorilla a second ago. You were really focused on counting those balls. Maybe that's the negativity in life. And man, there's some glaring positivity that we come in, and we're completely blind to what's going on right there. Discounting the positive. This is similar to mental filters that get put on. And the difference is we recognize the positives. We just actively reject them. We chalk them up to chance. We get a good grade on a test. We get a promotion at work, or we get an award. We just chalk it up to luck because that's not who we really are. I couldn't do that if I would really wanted to because we think of ourselves down here. We actively reject those positive things that happen in our life. Number 3, jumping to conclusions. And this is split up into 2 different things. One is mind reading. We assume that someone else is thinking something they're not, or believe they're going to act in a certain way they're not. Well, Brother John's probably going to be mad because the Facebook post I put on there this week. Right, I'm getting into what I think he's thinking. And how often do we assume people are thinking positive things? Rarely. I would say less than 10% of the time our assumptions, because I think that's just part of our sinful nature of humanity, is to shift towards those problem-centered focus. Fortune telling. If I was to say one that happens the most, it would probably be this one. The belief or prediction that something bad is going to happen. These are those what-if statements. We don't want to put ourselves out there in so many instances in life because of those what-ifs that trickle into our brain. We don't want, and this doesn't have to be anything to do with church or anything big. I don't want to go ask for that girl's number because what if she says no? I don't want to go sit with those people, in 6th grade when I was at Sir Goins Middle. I don't want to go sit with them because, well, what if they don't like my shoes, or what if they don't like my shirt? Those what-ifs start really early in life. Those things are not developed. They're just naturally in us as human beings. Magnification. We take a really small negative event and we turn it into something massive, all while minimizing those huge successes and abilities. The shortcomings are seen as proof of our own failures, and they become these massive mountains in our life, while the successes that we like to partake in, we just see them as little molehills. Emotional reasoning. This one is tricky because it's really difficult to recognize this in and of yourself. You can recognize this in other people, but it's really hard to recognize this in and of yourself. Emotional reasoning is the belief that emotions are proof of a similar reality. A person may feel guilty and conclude that they are a bad person just because of the way that they feel. They may feel rejected, so to them what that means is I was rejected. If I feel this, that means that happened. The emotional reasoning is a filter. Reality lines up with the emotion rather than the emotion lining up with the reality. That's really difficult to recognize in and of yourself. Number 6, should statements. Holding yourself to a standard based on what you should or ought to be able to do. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have known. How many of those things popping in? I ought to be able to do this better. I ought to be able to do this better. I should have been able to win that person because, man, they were right there. They came to church. I should have been able to do that. I should have been able to get that promotion. Labeling. We make a judgment about ourselves or somebody else without behavioral evidence. We see somebody driving down the road in a real fancy car. Well, they're stuck up, flashing that fancy car. What we don't recognize sometimes is maybe that's our jealousy creeping in. But we don't want to feel that. It's not comfortable for us to put all that on us, so by golly, it's their fault. And we like to blame and project and push, and all those things are these distortions that our brain wants to put in, the devil wants to plant to steal our joy. Because if they're stuck up, it's hard for me to be happy. I can't be happy if they're stuck up because they're putting it in my face, and they shouldn't do that. That's not nice. It's hard for me to be happy if I'm thinking that. Lastly, personalization and blame. Placing sole responsibility for the entirety of an event without taking into account aspects that were completely out of our control. I use this example with our middle schoolers sometimes. Always goes too many. There we go. See, these distorted thought patterns take pieces of actual reality and they distort them or they twist them to create a perceived reality. I think it's an important distinction: actual reality versus perceived reality. See, there's a phrase that we hear a lot. It says perception is reality. I would like to say that's the most incorrect thing ever, because perception is your reality. We see this a lot just in the first 4 books of the New Testament, right? Brother John talks a lot about it was 4 people that saw the same thing, but they told them in different ways. I may see something, Brother Gary may see something, Brother Mike may see something. We may go to the same carnival, ride the same rides, eat the same food. I had a blast. Gary had a blast. That hot dog gave Uncle Mike heartburn, and then the Twister thing made him sick, and he had a miserable time. It was too loud. It was the same thing, but his perceptions made it completely different for him than it did for me and Brother Gary. Fun fact, a Harvard study found that 90% of your happiness comes through your perceptions of circumstances rather than actual circumstances. So if you aren't happy or completely satisfied in your life, there's a good chance you have some distortions that need to be identified and corrected. We got a delay on, that's okay. There we go. We're talking about thoughts. It's really not hard to change a thought. Thoughts are pretty easy to adjust if we need to. If I asked you to think about a zebra riding a bicycle, juggling bowling pins, as soon as I finished the word pins, an image probably created in your brain. It's not difficult to change a thought. But when we get into changing beliefs, we get into changing something that's within our core, those thoughts have to be continually and consistently changed. See, this is just what we saw a second ago. We've got our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors on the outside. But what that does is it creates a whirlwind, a Kool-Aid stir, Brother Phil, so to speak, right? And the more that we are going in that singular direction, the deeper that cyclone gets. And eventually what happens is those negative thought patterns start to affect how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about others and how we feel about our future. And those thoughts that happen over and over and over and over start to become what we believe. See, beliefs don't just change overnight. We can think differently. I can like the Vols on Friday and hate them on Saturday, but my fandom doesn't change. It would take a long time for me not to like them. A lot of things would have to happen consistently for me not to like them. Changing a thought is kind of like a rotation of the earth. 24 hours. Day, night, it's done, it's over. That wasn't that hard. Happens pretty fast. Changing a belief is like the earth traveling around the sun. You got 4 seasons to go through, 365 days and nights. You've got some hailstorms, some tornadoes. You've got a lot of ups and downs along the way before that belief system changes. I think that may be why in Mark 9:23, Jesus said, if you can believe, all things are possible. Because it's not hard to think something's possible. It takes demonstrating that thought over and over and over for it to attach to us, to change our belief, whatever that is. You have to change that thought over and over and over. My favorite scripture, Philippians 4:8. Paul gives us this command, and I say command because he doesn't ask. He says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. In other words, whatsoever things are exactly the opposite of those 10 things that we just saw, whatever those things are exactly opposite of those patterns, think on those. It's completely diabolically opposed is what he's telling us to do. Even if you can't find enough good to balance out the bad, any. He didn't quantify that. He just says any. We may have to force our focus to set on one positivity thing or one potentially positive thing. There may be nothing that we can say that right now, this is good. I got nothing. What could be? What could come out of it? What lessons could be learned? What skills could be learned? How could we do that better the next time? Those are the things that are difficult for us to do. You'll see in a second if Mama Linda ever watches this, she's not going to be real pleased. The word faith appears 336 times in the King James Version of the Bible. Faith is the complete trust or confidence in someone or something. When we have true faith, some amazing things can happen, not just spiritually. I'm talking physical things. It's amazing what happens when true faith gets kicked in. And the placebo effect is a wonderful example of the power of thought. This is the effect produced by none other than one individual's belief that there should be an effect, even when there's no logical explanation for it. So story time. A couple years ago, my mama Linda went to India to have both knees replaced. If anybody's ever watched, I watched the knee replacement surgery on YouTube. That's an extensive surgery. I mean, they get the power tools out. It looks like post hole setters, ramming one of them rods down into one of the bones. I mean, it was extensive. And I thought, I want to see what Mama was getting into. And I thought, oh gosh, that's not good. So Mama came home, and obviously after a surgery like that, you're probably going to have some pain medicine. You're probably going to have some things to help with some of the recovery process. Well, it was in India. I mean, they don't have the same names for things over there. And even if they did, she probably didn't know what they meant. So she's over there for a month. She comes back, and her prescription runs out. So she's got to go get it filled at a pharmacy here. And this is this miracle medicine that's been helping her this whole time after getting rods jammed in her legs and her knees cut out. And I mean, this is an extensive thing. And so this wonderful, magical pain medicine that she had been taking this whole time was 800 milligram ibuprofen. What she thought was the equivalent of morphine or something incredible like that was something that she had probably taken for a headache countless other times. Placebo effects demonstrate how powerful your thought process is. See, an established belief or faith has the ability to unlock things in our physical world that weren't even possible otherwise. If you'd have told her she was taking ibuprofen 800 milligrams, she'd have probably been in excruciating pain. And that happened again. She got sick one night, sick to her stomach. And Papa said the only thing he could find was an allergy pill that kind of looked like the stomach medicine that she was taking. And this was the middle of the night. And he went and checked on her about 10 minutes later, and he said, honey, is that helping? She said, yeah, I think I can go to sleep now. It's just the power of what you're thinking. If you think something is going to have a positive effect, the likelihood that it does is a lot higher than if you don't think it's going to have an effect. It can make us run longer. It can make us lift heavier. It can even make us be addicted less. The second that we think that we don't need something as much as we previously thought, it's amazing how quickly that can start to disappear, the power that it has on us. And that only comes from persistently changing our thoughts one at a time. So we're going to go through one more demonstration with this topic, and then we got one more to close it out. So I want you to picture this for a second. We leave here, you get in the car, and your phone rings. Frantically, the person on the other line says, sir, I need you to come to Holston Valley Hospital immediately, and hangs up. That's all you get. Frantic. What thought comes into your mind? You don't have to say it, but what's the thought that comes into your mind? You might even go as far as to think who that might be or what the situation might have occurred. And it probably don't take but probably half a second before your emotional responses start to kick in. Your brain starts to produce chemicals that physically make you feel different. The panic, the fear, the uncertainty, all of a sudden makes your foot a lot heavier on your way up the road. Your safety rating and your insurance and all that stuff, you don't think about that as much because all the thoughts that just were established off of that 4 or 5 word sentence of you need to get to Holston Valley immediately. So as you are frantically heading up the road, you get another call. Much calmer, almost apologetic. Sir, so sorry. I had the wrong number. What does that change your thought to in that moment? Maybe the person you thought was up there dying in a car wreck or was already dead, all of a sudden they're alive and well. If they're calling me back and that's probably not them, I probably don't have to worry as much. Maybe a sense of relief. Maybe it takes a second for your heart to slow down and your sweat to quit pouring. Maybe you ease up on the gas a little bit. The whole series of events was put into motion based on one singular thought, which was something is wrong. So we didn't know, we weren't there, we couldn't see, but our brain kicked in and started to fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle. It constructed something from nothing other than a vague, audible phrase that it took and it ran with and concocted something that became a complete reality in a matter of a couple of seconds. Here's the good news. We can learn to identify some of those negative thought patterns, can actually start to retrain our brain. Now, let me clarify. Our brains do produce something called automatic thoughts, right? These are, think, problem-centered focus. These unsolicited thoughts often present very negatively. And I think this is probably an extension of Paul's idea when he said, when I want to do good, evil is ever present. When I want to think good, man, those thoughts just come out from nowhere, and they just are constantly eating away at me. So how do we start to change this? How do we begin this process of making this something different? We do this intentionally, with purpose. 2 Corinthians 10:4 says the weapons of this warfare are not carnal. The weapons may not be, but I think it could be argued that the battlefield is, and it's in our mind. The mental health crisis in our world today continues to reinforce that idea. Why would the devil fight our mind so hard if it wasn't? See, no one ever accidentally fell up a mountain. Turtles didn't get to the top of a fence post by themselves. These are things that were done intentionally. It has to have some element of planning and accountability. It can't be brushed aside or taken for granted. The process or the journey is all worth it. It's all worth it. See, the uncomfortableness of some self-reflection and discovering things that we need to improve on in and of ourselves is worth the joy of sitting through a family meal without fights or arguments. The awkwardness of sitting down to write about your current emotional state is worth the tears that were never cried because your anger and frustration with work stayed at work. And instead of coming home and projecting that onto your kids or your wife, you were able to go outside and play with them. It makes it worth it. The struggle of working to build awareness and correct some of those negative thought patterns. And let me tell you, some of that's not easy. I've spent a lot of time in school, and I had a lot of negative thought patterns that I still have to check every single day. They're not hard to get rid of. I will say this, you can't get rid of them. It's something you got to shrink, you got to make manageable, and you've got to develop other skills that just become bigger than them. Working towards correcting those negative thoughts is worth all the peaceful, sleep-filled nights that come after that. So what can we do? Man, that's a bunch of fluff, Christian. Right? That's some good. It sounds good, right? I always hate when I hear people talk and they say, well, just go do it. And I'm like, well, how? Tell me how. Just go out there and make $1 million in real estate. Awesome. Where are you getting money? You know, it's easy to say, well, this is what you should do because it works. So what can we do? This is a really cool, the first one, I use all these stuff with my kids at school. There was a Harvard study, kind of the unofficial name for it is the happiness advantage. And what they found was they found 3 things that drastically improved what they're using it for was mostly in people that are feeling depressive symptoms. But what they do is they challenge their participants with a couple of things. One, for 21 days, it don't take you more than about 5 minutes. In 21 days, write 3 very specific things that you're thankful for. Gratitudes. 3. So I always tell my kids, don't put family because you got 21 more days that you got to fill in with stuff. And if you are going to say something about family, what is it specifically that you're thankful for? At the beginning of this, I said, I'm thankful for a family that I grew up in, that I was consistently in the house of God and consistently brought up in the truth. Right? That's 1. I got 2 more that day, 3 more the next day. And the trick with that is you can't overlap. You got to think of 3 new ones every single day. Number 2, write about one positive experience, or you don't have to write. Think about one positive experience within the last 24 hours. Here's what this does that's really interesting, is your brain can't really distinguish the fact that it has already happened. So when you start to think about it, it plugs in as if it's happening again, and it starts to flood your body with all those positive neurotransmitters and chemicals that happened the second that it went down. So a couple years ago, I hit a half-court shot at the Arby's Classic, right? And it was awesome. The crowd cheered, and that feeling, that rush was awesome. And I may not ever be able to completely duplicate that, but every time I watch that video, I don't think that I ever end it frowning, because my brain replays that, and it starts to pump me full of feel-good chemicals. Number 3, write a letter of thanks or praise. Man, I think we all have at least one, if not, hopefully, more than one, but somebody that we can look back on our life and think they're the person that made a huge impact in me. My papa Leonard always talks about a teacher that he had growing up, and a man that lived down the street that hired him for a man's wage, is what he always says. And those people made such an impact on him that he consistently credits who he is to things that they instilled in him. And those people may not be around, right? But when we sit down and we start to think about who they were and the impact that they had on our life, what it does is everything that just took it for granted, never thought about it, right? We're too focused on all these problems that they're presenting right now. All of a sudden, our brain starts to shift back into these mental anchors. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. This is a real easy one to do. And sometimes we got to do this just to chill ourselves out. Make a T-chart. A T-chart's real simple. You make a line across and a longer line down, kind of looks like a plus sign. Whatever the situation is, split that thing up into 2 categories. What are the things that I have active control over? Well, my taxes went up. Well, I don't have any control over that. Here's what I do have control over, though. If I got to pay that, I got control over whether I go out to eat 5 times a week or 2 times a week. And maybe the 3 times a week that I cook in, I can have dinner with my family, or I can go to somebody else's house. See, you start to split stuff up, and then all of a sudden the things that you do have control over, start working on those. The things that you don't have control over, pray for them. There's nothing you're going to be able to do about them anyway. So split those into something that's a little more manageable, a little more within your capabilities and abilities. Work on the things that you can work on. My papa, I talk about him a lot because he spits a lot of good wisdom at me. My papa Leonard, he said it's better to do half of it all the way than all of it half the way. You at least end up dry. You may not end up heating and cooled, but you at least go end up dry if you put a roof on the house. Third thing, create mental anchors. Think back over your God moments. Uncle Mike talks about that. What are the moments in your life where you know for sure, in the midst of whatever is going on, that God directly was and showed up when you needed him to show up? Man, put a bookmark. Write that thing down. Put it in your car. Hey, remember when? ... Or your manna moments. I talk about that, Uncle, a lot. That was one of the things that Uncle Jake preached about at the youth thing in Pigeon Forge one time. I'll never forget that. What are your manna moments? What are your, I don't even know what that was. I don't even know how that happened, but it did. Bookmark those, man. Write those down. Take a picture of something that reminds you of those God moments and those manna moments. Finally, and this is something that I think we can probably do pretty easy, expose yourself to positivity. Man alive. One of the biggest psychological studies of all time was just about how what you're exposed to impacts what you then act like. Study of kids, man, and if they saw adults acting in very aggressive or very, I guess aggressive is the way to do it because they were hitting dolls. If they saw that, when they got into the room, what do you think that they did? They hit them too. But likewise, if they saw that doll being treated nicely, and these are little kids, or talked to kindly, they mimicked what they saw. Big John preached a message one time about the Laban and about him not wanting to send his goats, right, along with the herd. And so what did they do? They ended up taking the pure white sheep, and they put in front of them things that were speckled and spotted. And they started to produce the things that they saw every day. And I think it's interesting that it was at their life source, at their water. What the points that you get to, what are the things you surround yourself with at your life source, right? I talked to our to Frontline the other day. I I said, you gotta anchor yourself into right here. This is your life source. If you expose yourself to this over and over and over, I said, you don't have to be excited about it. If you just expose yourself to it, it's going to have an impact. And I promise you'll be excited about it later on when you start to reap the benefits of those exposures. So I want to leave you with one final challenge. One final challenge. I bet we'll go to my reference page. Hi. Final challenge. Think like Jesus. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto your own understanding. Because most of the time our understanding are those 10 little wicked things that tend to pop up. But in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. Philippians 2 and 5 says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Well, what is that mind? What is the mind of Jesus that we want to try to mimic? Jeremiah 29, 11 through 13 says, I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you, and ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search with me with all your heart. So tonight I want to leave you, and hopefully you can begin to challenge your focus. You can start to implement some self-reflection, and I'm telling you, it's difficult. That's really hard. When you start looking for things that you don't do well, your body and your brain will fight you. It will absolutely fight you because it does not want to do that. Identify and overcome some of those negative thought patterns and intentionally add some things into your day that I promise you will help you to start to live the abundant life that Jesus always intended. Thank you.